So there's been a lot of talk about white privilege with everything that's going on, and you might expect me to immediately rail against this idea, but there's actually a kernel of truth to it. However, I think people need to place it in the proper context and understand what they're actually talking about. You see, every person belongs to multiple groups. I'm white, I'm Latter-day Saint, I'm an American, I'm a conservative, I'm male, I'm a college graduate, I belong to a bunch of different groups. And groups generally exhibit certain patterns of behavior, which are observed and evaluated by other groups. For instance, because I'm a male, someone who just met me might think that I would probably prefer to watch sports rather than the latest season of Desperate Housewives. Now, is that person sexist for making that assumption? It is true that I may prefer watching that show over sports. I don't, but based on the patterns of male behavior, it's not irrational for them to have those preconceived notions. Is this fair? Well, not really. Ultimately, every person should be judged on the basis of their own behavior and character and not their group affiliation. However, the reality is that groups kind of do exhibit behavior and there is reputation involved. So the concept of white privilege is usually meant to highlight how blacks and whites are perceived generally in society. And if white privilege means that some whites, if it means that whites as a group have a better reputation than blacks as a group, that's correct. It's a fact. White populations have patterns of behavior that are very different from black populations. Blacks as a group have a higher violent crime rate, much higher. Higher rates of theft, higher rates of default, higher levels of poverty, and much more broken family structures when compared to whites. Now, I know that pointing these objective, verifiable facts immediately makes people want to call me a racist. However, if we're going to help resolve these racial tensions, we need to have an honest conversation about the facts involved and not squash an open dialogue about it. Furthermore, it's a shame that so many wonderful, hardworking, intelligent blacks, which are the vast majority, face a negative reputation because of the actions of a smaller group in their community. The vast majority of blacks are great. But unfortunately, there's a contingent within the black community who give the entire group a bad reputation. And the black community should do everything possible to disavow, reject, and distance themselves from thugs who damage their communities and who give their communities a bad name. Just how white people need to distance themselves from the racist element, the small racist element within their community that give them a bad name. Instead, we have pro athletes like Colin Kaepernick defending the criminal Michael Brown while propagating lies about hands up, don't shoot, which never happened. And then, of course, you have the best-selling records full of violence, rape, and lyrics like F the police. I'm sorry, that doesn't help with the perception of the black community. I don't care who you are. Rape, violence, and F the police is not healthy behavior. All right, another thing you should ask yourself. Where do your privileges come from? I would like to make the case that your race actually has a very small factor. This sort of reputation factor is very, very small. It's a simple fact that a black child born to a home with a stable mother and father who make wise life choices and teach wise, healthy life principles in their home is just as likely to succeed in modern America as a white child, is more likely to succeed in America than a white child born to a single mother with an absentee father. Just take a moment and reflect, self-reflect for a moment on the privileges that you enjoy in your life. Just think about it for a second. You'll probably end up realizing that the ones that you didn't earn came from the choices of your parents and your grandparents, not your skin color. You've heard the stories over and over again about the lessons learned from mom and dad and how their actions or lack of actions determined a person's advantages or disadvantages in their life. I know for me personally, that's the case. My parents made wise choices, and if they had made bad choices, I wouldn't have the advantages that I have in my life. Based on data and any measure of personal self-reflection, it's obvious that in modern America, the largest factor that determines the advantages, privilege, or disadvantages that a person inherits are based most largely on the choices of their parents, and specifically if they decided to stay together and raise their children. The sad reality is that around 70%, I can't stress that enough, there's never been a place in history where 70% of children grew up without a father in the home. Okay? Let's just take a look for a moment at the stats. Over 70% of Black children grow up without a father or are born out of wedlock. Okay, those are the stats. Okay, let's take a look at what effect that is regardless of race. 90% of runaway and homeless children are from single parent homes. A teen in a single parent home is 5 times more likely to commit suicide. 71% of teen pregnancies come from single parent homes. 85% of children with behavioral disorders come from single parent homes. 71% of high school dropouts come from single parent homes. 85% of youth in prison come from single parent homes. Single parent children are twice as likely to drop out of high school, twice as likely to end up in jail, and 4 times more likely to end up needing emotional support for behavioral problems. This is according to the CDC, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other government agencies. If you want the facts, make a comment, I'll give them to you. But the reality is, I don't care. That isn't a racial thing. That's any group. So why would you expect a group where 70% of the children are growing up without a father in the home, knowing these statistics? Why would you expect to have similar outcomes? Why would you expect for them to have similar levels of interaction with the police? Yes, whites do enjoy advantages that blacks don't, but that's not because of skin color, or if it is, it's a very small portion of it. Whites enjoy more stable family structures. And frankly, people will say, oh, well, the family structures were destroyed by racism. Actually, no. In the 1950s, the black illegitimacy rate was about the same as what whites have today. It was about 20%. In the era since the 1950s, when racism has gone down, single families have gone up. And I have a whole video that explains why that is. But you can't claim that racism is driving the breakdown of the black family when literally, while racism was going down, the problem was increasing. The data doesn't match the narrative. Now, why am I bringing all this up? I'll tell you why. It's because the plight of the black community saddens me. Black people and black culture have so much to offer and already have given us so much. The black community has produced some of our bravest heroes, some of our greatest thinkers, some of our most talented musicians and athletes, and their community has caused a much needed moral reflection on the unhealthy and downright evil paradigms that have pervaded our society in the past. And to some degree, in small portions of our society still pervade it. My desire, and the desire of essentially almost all whites and conservatives, is to see the black community thrive and rid itself of the terrible plagues and calamities that result when family structures fall apart. As we strengthen and promote our shared identity as Americans and our shared belief in the importance of stable families, we will see both racial unity and a more broad level of prosperity for all people in this country. Privilege is the product of your family, and blacks cannot enjoy the same advantages if their families are broken. So, Mr. Kaepernick, as soon as you start a movement to help restore black families, instead of a movement to propagate continued group bias, I'll be with you, buddy. But unfortunately, you're fighting the wrong fight.